Dom Perrottet joins me here in the studio. Good to see you. We've just heard water restrictions coming in earlier than expected. Is this a sign of things to come? Could those water restrictions get worse as the summer bears on?
Yeah, I mean, they could. The state's 99% in drought, and I think a lot of people just think of regional New South Wales when we think of the drought, Laura, but it's affecting Sydney too. Warragamba's around 46%. It's the level at the moment. So these water restrictions we're bringing forward, and they'll come in on December 10. But yes, I think people across our state need to realise, particularly in Sydney now, that we are going through a challenging time, and the drought is not just affecting the bush, it's affecting us here in Sydney.
Now, weeks ago, let's get to the economy. You warned that it was now time to break the emergency glass, quote unquote, to revive economic growth in this country. You've seen the announcement from the Morrison government in recent days. Is that what you had in mind?
Look, we welcome any support from the federal government when it comes to infrastructure investment, so I was pleased that the Prime Minister announced that yesterday. I've also called for the fact, though, that when it comes to the federal financial relations, that states should be incentivised for reform, not penalised. And whilst I welcome the support for New South Wales, and we're building $93 billion of infrastructure over the next 4 years, helping drive our economic growth, I look at a state like Queensland, they've got the lion's share, and I think Anastasia Palaszczuk would be laughing all the way to the bank. You've got a state there that's public services growing at a much greater rate than its population. It doesn't reform, it doesn't take on any asset recycling. But why would you? Why would you take on political risk if the Commonwealth government is going to bail you out? I mean, you've got a state there that's almost trading insolvently.
Is the Commonwealth rewarding Queensland? In recent days, you've talked about the $30 billion infrastructure shortfall that New South Wales is facing. I mean, you're going to get maybe not even $1 billion here. It doesn't touch the sides, does it?
Well, we'll work through it with the Commonwealth. And as I said, I'm grateful for any support.
You're being very polite.
Well, I'm grateful for any support, and I've raised this with the Federal Treasurer, and I appreciate that they've got budget constraints. I respect the fact that I support Josh's position that he wants to have that budget surplus. That's what he took to the election. I think that's important. We've got to live within our means, and I congratulate the federal government for that. But when I look across the country and you see states that don't reform, that don't make better use of what they have, they seem to get rewarded for it. Whereas here in New South Wales, we stand on our own 2 feet. We seem to be penalised. And I think we need to move to a system, particularly a tax system, where states are actually incentivised to reform rather than sitting back and sitting on their hands and waiting to be bailed out by the Commonwealth.
Well, you have put your head above the parapet when it comes to the need for federation reform, economic reform, but it doesn't seem like the federal government's listening to you, to be very honest. Do you accept that there is not an appetite at the federal level to have that political fight? And what can you do in terms of going it alone in New South Wales?
Look, I mean, the Productivity Commission has come out with a whole range of areas where reform should be undertaken, and a lot of those areas are wholly located within the states. But if you're going to go on a path of tax reform, that can be not just politically challenging, but financially challenging as well. Yeah, I mean, the reality is all states and territories rely on inefficient taxes, whether it's stamp duty, payroll tax. These are taxes that impede economic and productivity growth. But for the states to just come in and abolish those taxes would put a significant hole in our budgets, which we use to fund our education and health systems. So, look, I welcome the Federal Treasurer's comments recently, where he spoke about the need for productivity reform. And I've had very constructive discussions with the Federal Treasurer on the basis that he said, well, if you come up with some reform ideas, he's happy to sit down and have a look at them.
It would be a very bold Treasurer to abolish stamp duty, wouldn't it? I mean, that is a cash cow for you and your budget every year. What would you replace it with? What's a more efficient tax? You're talking about land tax?
Well, I mean, at the moment, what we're doing through setting up our Federal Financial Relations Review, which is being chaired by David Thodey, is to look at what some of those options could be. And there's a range of options that may be on the table. But look, the reality is stamp duty is a very bad tax, and it's not just inefficient, it's incredibly volatile. We've written down about $10 billion, and that puts a challenge for the states to plan for future service delivery. Whether it's GST, where we've seen significant write-downs as consumption has slowed, and also stamp duty. But look, at the moment, we want to have a discussion. Reform is difficult, it's a challenge, but with the economy slowing nationally and globally, now is the right time for us to have these discussions and work with the Commonwealth for a better system.
Well, the RBA has been calling on the Commonwealth to do more for, it seems like, months now. Income tax cuts, the first tranche has already gone through. Have you seen an effect on the economy? Would you like to see the second tranche come in earlier than 2022?
Look, I think it's too early to tell. There's no doubt that if you look at the cuts to interest rates, a lot of people are simply just paying down their mortgages. And we are seeing a slowing in consumption. Discretionary spend in New South Wales is the lowest it's been since the GFC.
Shouldn't that be so concerning then? You know, Morrison arguing yesterday that there's an extra $9.5 billion worth of stimulus in the economy in the last year. We've had those tax cuts and still it hasn't moved the dial.
Yeah, and that is concerning, but I would also say it's early days. Let's see how it plays out.
Where will we see the effect then?
Well, you know, I would say let's watch that over the course of the next year. But at the same time, the Morrison government coming out with the infrastructure package yesterday is a good thing, because the Reserve Bank governor has also been saying that, and the World Bank, the IMF, that what particularly sub-sovereign jurisdictions can do to help drive economic growth is build infrastructure. We're leading the way in New South Wales. It's great that other states are coming on board. They should just be coming on board by themselves rather than waiting for the federal government to bail them out.
Just quickly, should Brian Hartzer step down?
No, I think, you know, the banks have certainly gone through a challenging time, and I'm sure they'll work through it. It's a bit like politicians, they're easy to have a crack at, but as long as they learn from some of the challenges and mistakes they made in the past, he appears to have done so.
They were warned and did nothing.
Look, and look, they make mistakes, but at the same time, I think he's a good leader of that bank, and I'm sure he will fix those issues going forward.
And you're going to sort out this Ritz-Carlton issue in Sydney, or?
Well, we will. We will. And look, I mean, the IPC is currently, we're doing a review. The Productivity Commissioner is doing a review of the IPC. Rob Stokes, the Planning Minister, is looking at a precinct plan for Pyrmont, and I'm sure we'll get that hotel up and running here in Sydney.